Let's talk to John Rothman, find out who this person was, because I think a lot of people don't know a lot about the president of Iran and what it means for us. John Rothman, of course, former KGO talk show host, political analyst, presidential historian, and hello, John Rothman.
And hello, Kim McAllister.
Hi, thanks for being here on short notice, even.
For you, anything.
Thank
I do
you.
want to point out
Yeah.
that the former president, now deceased, is dead. They have identified the bodies
Oh,
of
okay.
both the president and the foreign minister.
Yeah.
And so he was the eighth president of Iran since the revolution, and only 66 years old, relatively young. And it appeared that he might well have succeeded the Grand Ayatollah. And so there's a real situation here. But I want to be crystal clear. The president of Iran is a figurehead. The president of Iran does not have substantive power. But this president of Iran, Raisi, was someone who was highly regarded. Now, the other interesting thing is the helicopter he went down in was a U.S.-made Bell 212. It's an older helicopter, which was gifted to Iran during the days of the Shah. So remember that there is real isolation in terms of being able to get access to equipment. And
Yeah.
so they do recycle everything. They reuse everything.
So this was an old helicopter. Tony and I were talking this morning, and he was saying like maybe Vietnam era.
Yes, it would have been, because
Yeah.
remember, the revolution took place essentially in 1979, and there have been no new equipment flows. It is also interesting to know that Raisi was a hardliner. He was known as the Butcher of Tehran because he really went after protesters, demonstrators, anybody who dissented. And so he was viewed as a hardliner. He was a Holocaust denier, as was one of his predecessors. And he also has stated very clearly, when you hear the chant from the river to the sea, that they believe it means the elimination of Israel completely.
So I was reading a little bit about him, and he started, before he was elected president, he was a judge and known for squashing dissent. And this is a country that's had protests about being able to speak freely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly right. He was a hardliner. And that's why he was in line to succeed the Grand Ayatollah. And remember, the Grand Ayatollah is the one who has real power. If the Grand Ayatollah doesn't like you as president, you're gone. You're out.
Yeah.
And so the man who evidently is succeeding, and we don't know a lot about him, is currently the vice president, and he will become president. But there will be a new election that will be held, I'm told, within 90 days. But you never know in situations like this.
Do they have real elections in Iran? I mean, would they be considered free and fair? Or
No.
is it just all a sham kind of deal?
Well, let's put it this way. The Grand Ayatollah has to approve your candidacy.
Okay.
So if you wanted to run and you opposed government policies, you would not be permitted
You're
to
not
run.
even, no.
So it is an interesting situation because it's not a free and democratic operation. Although Iranian officials argue, well, they have a choice. There are 3 or 4 candidates, and you can choose who you want. But they are government-approved candidates.
Okay.
So it's hardly limiting. I don't think it will really affect what happens in terms of Iranian relations with the world. It's very clear that the Iranian government hardline is going to be preserved, that the allies of Iran, from Hezbollah to Islamic Jihad, to Hamas, to the Houthis, all will continue to receive the aid that they have received previously, because it's not the president of Iran who is in charge of that,
Yeah.
So my feeling is there will now be conspiracy theories. Already we're hearing suggestions that the Israelis did it, which of course is not true. This was a bad move. I was talking to my wife. We had a very good friend whose son died in a helicopter crash in Hawaii when he shouldn't have been flying. It was a dark night and very windy.
Right.
You have the case of so many different cases of helicopter flights, which we know are dangerous. What was sad in this case is that not only was the president there, but the foreign minister was there. And we've seen the foreign minister of Iran on a number of television programs recently. So it was a blow. And of course, nobody expects the helicopter to crash.
No, it was a foggy forest. They were coming back from an event in Azerbaijan, and apparently it was, yes, look at that thick fog. And the chopper goes down. It's interesting because weather conditions would indicate that this was, weather caused accident type of situation. But my first thought was, oh, somebody took that chopper down too. And I don't know why my mind went there, except for that there were 8 very important people in Iran aboard this chopper. So it was the president, it was the
Foreign minister.
foreign minister, and it was, they don't list all the rest of them, but we know there were high-ranking government officials in Iran. And so I don't know what it does. It mean anything, do you think, for the war with Israel and Hamas?
No, not a
Nothing.
thing,
Okay.
because it all comes out of the Grand Ayatollah's positions, and the president is a figurehead, and the foreign minister is essentially a figurehead as well. Although this foreign minister appeared on television here in the United States, was at the United Nations, but they have no real impact on policy. Remember, Iran is not a democracy. Now,
Hmm.
what interested me is the number of Iranians who evidently rejoiced at the death of the president. Of course,
Really?
they're
Well,
all Iranians who are in exile. That is,
oh,
they are not
hmm,
in Iran, but these positions are clear. And the Israeli government has been completely silent, but the
yeah,
American government felt compelled to say they had nothing to do with the crash of the helicopter.
right.
And so the United
Because of
States,
people like me who immediately thought, oh, I wonder if we did that. Yeah.
yeah. So these are the
Yeah.
conspiracy theorists.
Hmm.
But in terms of American-Iranian relations, I expect there will be no measurable change or shift in policy.
I saw a picture of they were, the outpouring of people who are mourning the loss, and among them, Vladimir Putin, who called Raisi a friend to Russia. So, I mean,
He had
yeah,
just been on a state visit. There's the
yeah,
picture. Thank you very much. They had just been together in Moscow,
yeah,
and so that there you have it.
yeah, and that's who we're looking at. I mean, that's who he was aligned with, Putin, right? The I don't know who else, the South Koreans, whomever, yeah, I
Not
don't know.
South Koreans, North
North
Korea.
Korea. My apologies. Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, those are the folks that are coming forward to express sympathy. So I
Yeah,
guess
it's the access of
of
evil
evil.
in
Yeah.
this generation,
Yeah.
and it's Iran, it's North Korea, it's Hamas, it's the various radical states. So this is a very sad moment. By the way, no one wishes any leader to die in this fashion,
Yeah.
even if you oppose them. But these are the peculiarities of living in our society today.
How old is Iran's supreme leader?
He's now, I believe, in his 80s.
Oh wow. Okay. So now they have to be trying to find someone that is capable of filling in for him and
He will name his
him.
successor.
Right.
I'm absolutely sure.
Wow.
But remember, it is the Islamic Republic, meaning that it is a nation founded on Islam. And there he is, the Grand Ayatollah, who succeeded Khomeini, who
Mm-hmm.
was, of course, the nemesis of the United States over many presidencies. So this is the reality of Iran. Now, I must tell you that I have very good friends from Iran who go back and forth, because you can do that, who would love to see this government overthrown.
Yeah.
And you may remember that there was talk of the United States participating in it, but we're very cautious. And the reason is that in 1953, when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president, the green light was given for a overthrow of the government of Iran and the Shah being restored to power. And that was all done at the behest of British Petroleum, because the Iranian government under Mossadegh, who was the prime minister, had nationalized the oil. And so it was a concerted move in which John Foster Dulles, our then Secretary of State, was directly involved. So we have to be cautious. We cannot. That was an attempted coup which worked because the Shah was restored to power. And of course, the anger of the Iranian people boiled over in 1978 and 79 with the overthrow of the Shah.
Yep.
By the way, the anti Khomeini forces, or the anti Islamic forces today, are rallied around the Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, who I had the opportunity to interview on KGO when he wrote a book.
Oh, wow.
Uh, and But they have very little support. But I can tell you, it's an interesting thing. If somebody says they are from Persia, they are supporters of the old Shahist regime. If somebody says they're from Iran, well, that puts them in a political context as well. So there are interesting shifts in terms of language as well.
When you look at the recent protest in Iran, I mean, for a time, there were all over the country, there were people rising up, and they were dealt with harshly. And I don't know whose policy was that, the president's or
Private
the supreme
Raisi,
leaders, or
no,
yeah.
the president who just died was one of the prosecutors. They went after these people tooth and nail.
So I'm reading on CNN that there's some people think there's a possibility here that this upcoming presidential election in Iran, which now has to be completed within 50 days, could present the opportunity for a moderate or
No,
some to come in. You say
no,
no.
because you cannot run without the approval of the Grand Ayatollah.
Right, right.
So,
Yeah.
say, Kim, you and I wanted to run for president of Iran. The fact that you are an extremist would make you very, well, you're a woman. I'm sorry, that wouldn't
Right.
work at all. I point that out because people who
Yeah.
are gay or people who are women or people who are not seen as conforming to the Islamic revolution
Right.
don't run. I, on the other hand, would be a perfect candidate, right?
Yeah.
I've no deficits. Oh,
Yeah,
wait, I do. I'm a
no,
Jew.
no,
That would
you
be
won't
the
work
end of me.
either. We're both out. That's it. All right, let's turn to, because while you're here, I thought I would throw it at you. The Trump trial, or the hush money trial in New York, is kind of winding down. And today on the stand,
Oh,
Michael Cohen wrapping up his testimony, and he admitted to stealing from the Trump organization. What do
are
you
you
make of that? Does
surprised?
it? Well, no, I guess not. I mean, no.
It's part of his charm. But I want to focus people. I want to focus people. There's only one question which should be central, and that is, did Donald Trump authorize hush money to be paid in this situation? And then were the books doctored? And who was responsible? Because this really is a business records case.
Yeah.
This is a question of falsification. By the way, it's not illegal to pay off a porn star.
No.
You want to keep somebody quiet, you can do it. But if business records were altered, so I would suggest, if I were involved in this case, I would say Michael Cohen's credibility doesn't really matter. What matters is the records, the actual records. And Weisselberg should be brought into court and have to testify. But of course, he is now on Rikers Island, so he's in jail himself.
Oops.
You know, it's interesting. Can you think of any of the major Trump participants who have not gone to jail? But the real issue for me in all of this is an elevated question. Is it right to have a former president or a president of the United States whose standards do not meet the high standards of what should be the office of the president of the United States?
Well, anybody, I think, who's a thinking person would say no.
And of course,
I,
there's one other element. I just want to throw this in. Donald Trump repeatedly says that all of this is a conspiracy by Joe Biden, that it's
right.
Joe Biden's Justice Department that has brought these various cases. And all I can tell you is that is absolutely not true and impossible, because they're brought by state court, by federal court. It has nothing to do with Joe Biden. But remember, the business records case is what really is at stake here. Ultimately, the question of Trump's involvement in January 6th, what he did or did not do, will also be critical. But whether or not we get to that before the election is going to be really, really important.
So I'm reading this article in the New York Times that Mark actually sent me last night, and it talked about the advantages that the prosecutors have in this case. And there's two things that really stood out that may give them the advantage here. One of them is that the law in New York holds a defendant accountable even when he doesn't carry out the crime himself, as long as he intentionally aids it. So they use the example here when they seated a jury, and they asked the jury, could you accept the idea that a husband who hired a hitman to kill his wife was guilty of her murder because the husband didn't kill the trigger, but aided in that death? And so the people that said yes, those were the ones that, so in that same way, maybe he didn't do the deed, but he aided in the deed. And the other is, they could invoke this decision from 2016 precedent that upheld a conviction that a defendant who didn't handle or approve the false records in question, but was reasonably foreseeable that his actions would have resulted in the filing of false records. So those two things kind of are the on the side of the prosecution when it comes to legal maneuvers that could give them the edge.
Yeah, and that's the question. Look, the question is not whether Donald Trump had an affair with Stormy Daniels. He clearly did, even though
he says he didn't. But
it
I mean, we
doesn't
all
matter.
know.
We know that it happened.
Yeah.
But the question is, did Donald Trump participate in and condone the payoff of money, and not just the money, but then the altering of records, business records, in order to figure out how to do it all? And that's where it all comes down to. That's where the rubber hits the road. And I would suggest to you that I can't tell you what the jury will do, nor can I tell you how the trial will turn out. But I can tell you that's where it ought to be focused. And the fact is there anybody listening to the sound of my voice who doesn't believe that Donald Trump knew all about Stormy Daniels, that he didn't collude and have Michael Cohen serve as his agent in order to shut Stormy Daniels up? And by the way, maybe he was doing it to protect Melania, but it doesn't matter.
No.
If he did it, he's guilty. Will the jury be instructed that way by the judge? That's the other thing I'm going to be interested in. How does the judge instruct the jury? And frankly, Michael Cohen is as big a sleaze as Donald Trump.
Yep.
But nonetheless, the question is, who is the one who was responsible for all of this? And if Michael Cohen was acting at the behest of Donald Trump, so be it. By the way, are you surprised at the accusation that Michael Cohen might have skimmed a few bucks off the top?
He admitted it. 30 grand, I think, is what he said he stole. And are you more likely to believe someone who gets on the stand and says, yeah, I did that. I took the money. I did all these bad things, who is there? He's not trying to cover up anything he did. He's laying it all out there. Yeah. And from what I've read, it's about how much the jury will believe of his testimony.
Right. Now, can I ask you a question? Do you believe that Donald Trump is being persecuted?
Oh, no.
Or prosecuted?
Prosecuted, absolutely.
Okay. But yeah. I'm telling you, I use those two words, and some of you heard me use them before, because that's the divide in this country.
Yeah.
The people who believe that Donald Trump is being persecuted. And let me point out to you that key members of the Republican leadership, including the Speaker of the House of Representatives, including members of the United States Senate, went to this New York trial and either went into the courtroom or were outside the courtroom and suggest that Donald Trump is being persecuted. Yeah. It is so abhorrent to me that members of Congress would allow themselves to be used in this fashion. It's and parroting, by the way, exactly what Donald Trump was forbidden to say publicly with that gag order. I guess when I boil it all down, it's Donald Trump's complete contempt for justice. But more than that, it is that the Republican Party would have the same sort of contempt. They don't understand. They don't know the facts of the case. They're just proceeding from the premises Donald Trump has, that he is being persecuted. I object to that profoundly. And if you look at the members of the House who are standing there, these are people sworn to uphold the law. And what are they doing? So I find that aspect of this distressing. So may I just tell you, I segment this into various parts. One is the question of whether Donald Trump was in fact altering records to protect himself?
Mm-hmm.
Number two, does Michael Cohen and his record keeping, which was pretty good, does that have any impact on the case? Number three, why would the Speaker of the House of Representatives come down from Washington, D.C. to stand up for Donald Trump? And who are these Republican members of Congress who went into the courtroom, sat there, and now
Yes.
believe that Donald Trump is being persecuted? I mean,
Do
I
you
don't know
think
whether Trump will be found innocent or guilty, but if you ask me, he's pretty sleazy.
do you think that they're accusing the Biden administration of weaponizing the Department of Justice because that's what they would do?
Well, there's no question that the Department of Justice has not been weaponized,
Truth.
but it's also true that Donald Trump intends to weaponize the
Right.
Justice Department.
So
He
of
has
course
made
he
it
would think that
clear.
someone else is because that's what he would do, right?
And he says it publicly.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people have read the some of the inside information on this idea of reforming the government. One of my favorite books is a book called The Plot That Failed. It is by a former Nixon administration official who points out that that was Nixon's intent in a second term, thwarted only by Watergate.
Yeah.
And I would suggest to all of our listeners that you really listen to what Donald Trump says he will do in a second term. By the way, that includes extending pardons to people who were involved in January 6th. Thank you for putting it up. It's very important. Richard Nathan was a good friend of mine, Dick Nathan, and his book, The Plot That Failed, Nixon and the Administrative Presidency, it's a carbon copy of what the Trump people are now proposing. Dick Nathan died a few years ago. I interviewed him, by the way, on KGO
Yeah.
because I wanted people to understand what that plot was. And thank God it failed. And I hope the plot now will fail as well.
Last question for you. The California uh, Republican Party held their whiz-bang convention in Burlingame over the weekend. We
Sure
know
did.
Kristi Noem was there. Anything come out of that convention that surprised you or that's noteworthy that we should talk about?
I will just reflect on how sad I am. I attended Republican convention after Republican convention here in California. I was the youngest member of the Republican State Central Committee. The Republican Party today is not the Republican Party that I grew up in, where there were real battles between liberals and conservatives over the question of life versus choice, if you will. There were real debates and substantive discussions. And the reason the Republican Party holds not a single statewide elective office, why the Republican Party is a minority in the Senate and in the Assembly, why the Republican Party cannot even field legitimate candidates, is because it has failed the people of California so completely. May I tell you, my ardent wish is that when Donald Trump goes down to the crashing defeat that he deserves so richly, that the Republican Party will have to rebuild from the ground up and will once again become a viable, important part of the political process. It's a shame. And those of you who know that I've talked about this, I gave a talk some years ago in the Tonga room of the Fairmont Hotel here in San Francisco to the Republican County Committee. And the title of my talk was The Rise, Fall, and Demise of the Republican Party in San Francisco. But I talked in a broader sense about California. It is the ultimate tragedy that we have descended to this depth. And may I, as long as I'm at it, think about who Donald Trump put on the court and the fact that he said he changed the court. But then think about this. I want to talk about two people who are not Trump appointees, Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito. Clarence Thomas clearly has a bias. His wife Ginny's record is clear.
Right.
And Sam Alito blames his
flag.
wife
Yeah.
for hoisting a flag after January 6th upside down.
Always the wife's fault. Yeah.
I blame everything on my wife. No,
Yeah.
wait, be careful. I better say that softly. She might hear me in the other room. But I do think that it is clear that neither Thomas nor Alito will recuse themselves from decisions in which they clearly have a bias.
Right.
And I think that's shocking. I would remind people that when Richard Nixon's case went to the Supreme Court, my old friend Bill Rehnquist, who subsequently, of course, became Chief Justice, he was then an Associate Justice, Bill Rehnquist recused himself in the case of
It's
Nixon.
not the way it's done anymore,
I
though.
know.
Those were the old days when there was honor and decency, and there were a reason that we put these people up on a pedestal.
Right.
Now, that the pedestal has come crashing down, we realize the honor and the dignity's been gone for a while, and we're just now catching on.
But it's sad
Yeah.
because one of the most stellar moments in American politics, even though I disagreed with the court decision, was when Al Gore conceded the presidency in 2000 after the election. And the Supreme Court made the ruling that on a 5-4 vote that put George Bush into the White House. And Al Gore, in a speech which was one of the greatest speeches in American history, said, I don't agree with the decision of the court, but I accept it. And I think the tragedy now is, will people accept a court so biased? And when the question of presidential immunity comes for a decision, and that will be in a few weeks, and I hope you'll have me back for that,
Mm-hmm.
it could be that only 2 members of the court, Alito and Thomas, will uphold absolute presidential immunity. What a tragedy that would be. I urge people, all you have to do is go back and read what Chief Justice Berger said in the United States versus Richard Nixon, when he said very clearly, no one is above the law. And I think that is the fundamental issue which we will have to wrestle with. In the meantime, we just continue to observe. And as soon as you're through with me, although I'm going to listen to your next segment, I'm going to turn on the trial because I want to hear what's going on. But it appears from what I'm hearing that we will not have final arguments until next week, and that this is going to drag a little bit longer. And then we just have to wait and see.
You said something interesting about the Supreme Court a few minutes ago, which is, will people accept the Supreme Court's decisions? And just thinking about that, it's like we have a choice. Either we accept it, or we have a massive cleavage in this country, and there is fighting, and there's protests in the street, and it turns into something ugly and crazy. So what are the real choices here? If people don't accept the rule of the Supreme Court, what does it look like?
That's what Donald Trump is saying, though. He's saying he won't pledge that there will be no violence if the court rules against him. He is making that threat. It is a threat to American democracy. And that is what I find so disturbing. You can go back and hear what former presidents have said when they agree or disagree, but all of them accept certain framework in which our democracy functions. Yeah. Donald Trump would violate that framework. He would violate that confidence. And that's what makes Donald Trump so dangerous to American democracy.
If we disregard our system of government, we're in real trouble.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that would really be the doom of American democracy. My hope, and I know I come on here to give you analysis, not to be a partisan, but if this were a Democrat pulling the kind of stuff that Donald Trump has been pulling, I would be saying the same thing. My loyalty is to the Constitution of the United States and to the idea of the integrity of the American system. If we don't have faith in the American system, then the hope that America has offered generations, not to mention the world, will be doomed. So I'm watching not only what happens in the New York courtroom, I'm really waiting to see when the Supreme Court renders a verdict, which will come in either the end of this month or in June when they go when they take their summer recess. I want to see how they rule on absolute presidential immunity, and I want to see the lineup of the court. So we have some very dramatic days ahead. And may I tell you, the interesting thing is that's what makes being on the podcast with you, but also doing my Around the Political World with John Rothmann every day, so interesting.
And you have your The Voice as well.
Yes, I am now doing a 10 minutes, roughly a day, for The Voice of San Francisco. And it has been fascinating to comment on local issues. There it is, The Voice of San Francisco with John Rothmann. And the podcast is up and running. There's a section when you go to the website and it says podcasts. They're also, by the way, putting on my Around the Political World segment as well.
Easy to find that.
We're just having a wonderful, there it is.
Yay.
We're just having a wonderful time. And you know, the only thing I regret, no interaction. So I
Yeah.
am going to participate in Mark Thompson's social gathering.
June swoon. Absolutely.
And I will be there to answer any questions, to take any criticism, and to have that kind of interactive experience, which frankly was the heart and soul of KGO. So I'm
Well,
very
John
happy with
Rothman,
them.
thank you for being here and jumping in to talk about the president of Iran and the Trump trial in New York. We'll see you on Wednesday, so we get a double dose of John Rothman this week. Thank you
And
so
may I
much.
say, I am delighted, and it's always a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to appear with Kim McAllister.
Thank you, John Rothman.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.